The Psychology of Overthinkers. Why your mind won't switch off. You know that feeling when a conversation ends, but your brain keeps going. You replay what you said, what they said, what they might have meant. You create imaginary arguments, alternative endings, better responses you should have thought of 3 hours ago. And somehow, a tiny interaction becomes a full psychological investigation. That's overthinking. And if you do it regularly, you already know something important. Overthinking rarely feels irrational while you're doing it. It feels responsible, careful, protective. Your brain tells you it's solving problems. But most of the time, it's just trapping you in loops. Today, we're going to look at the psychology behind overthinking, why some people do it more than others, what's actually happening in the brain, and why intelligent people are often the most vulnerable to it. Because overthinking isn't just thinking too much. It's a very specific relationship with uncertainty, emotion, and control. Psychologists often separate overthinking into two categories: rumination and worry. Rumination is focused on the past. You replay mistakes, embarrassing moments, things you regret. It's the mental equivalent of scratching at an old wound to see if it still hurts. Worry, on the other hand, is future-focused. What if this goes wrong? What if they secretly dislike me? What if I fail? What if something bad happens? One pulls you backwards. The other pushes you into imaginary futures, but both come from the same core mechanism. Your brain is trying to predict and control uncertainty. And that sounds useful in theory. Humans survived because we could anticipate danger. The problem is that the modern brain often treats social or emotional uncertainty like physical danger. A tiger in the wild and an awkward text message can trigger surprisingly similar stress responses. Not equally intense, obviously, but neurologically, your brain still interprets uncertainty as a threat. That's why overthinking doesn't feel optional, it feels urgent. One of the most interesting things researchers have found is that overthinking heavily involves the brain's default mode network. This is the network that becomes active when you're not focused on the outside world, when your mind starts drifting inward. Self-reflection, daydreaming, mental simulations, imagining conversations. The default mode network is incredibly useful. It helps humans learn from experience and imagine the future. But in chronic overthinkers, it can become overactive. Instead of reflecting, the brain loops. And here's the strange part. The brain often mistakes analysis for progress. You can spend 2 hours mentally dissecting a problem and still feel productive, even if nothing has actually changed. That's because thinking gives the illusion of control. If your mind keeps moving, it feels like you're doing something. But emotionally, overthinking often has the opposite effect. It increases anxiety, reduces clarity, and slowly exhausts your nervous system. That's why overthinkers are often mentally tired even when they haven't physically done much. Their brain has been running in the background all day like 20 tabs open on a laptop. There's a reason highly analytical people often struggle with overthinking. A more capable brain can generate more possibilities, more interpretations, more scenarios, more what-ifs. And intelligence can accidentally become fuel for anxiety. Because when you're good at predicting outcomes, you also become good at imagining negative ones. You stop asking, what's likely, and start asking, what's possible? Those are very different questions. An overthinker can turn a tiny uncertainty into an entire catastrophic storyline, not because they're irrational, but because their brain is extremely good at pattern detection. The issue is that the brain doesn't always distinguish between possible and probable, and socially intelligent people are especially vulnerable. They notice tone changes, facial expressions, pauses in conversation. They pick up subtle signals other people miss. But sometimes they read too deeply into normal human behavior. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A short response becomes anger. A neutral expression becomes disapproval. Their awareness becomes hyper-awareness. And hyper-awareness is exhausting. Most overthinking is not actually about logic. It's about emotion, the desire to avoid emotional pain. Think about how often overthinking starts after uncertainty. Your brain starts analyzing because certainty feels safer than not knowing. In psychology, this is connected to something called intolerance of uncertainty. Some people can sit with uncertainty relatively comfortably. Others experience it almost like psychological friction. Their brain keeps trying to close the loop. But life rarely gives complete certainty. So the overthinker gets trapped chasing answers that don't fully exist. And often, beneath the overthinking, there's fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of failure. Fear of making the wrong choice. Overthinking becomes emotional self-protection. The brain thinks, if I analyze this enough, maybe I can avoid pain. But ironically, the analysis itself becomes painful. How overthinkers break the cycle. Most people try to stop overthinking by thinking their way out of it, which almost never works. Because overthinking is not just a thought problem, it's a nervous system problem. The goal isn't to eliminate thought completely. That's impossible. The goal is to reduce compulsive analysis. And psychologically, one of the healthiest things a person can learn is this: not every thought deserves engagement. A thought appearing in your mind does not automatically make it important. That's a huge shift, because overthinkers often treat thoughts like alarms. But many thoughts are just mental noise. And another important thing: action interrupts overthinking better than analysis does. Overthinking ends where acceptance begins.